Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 31st of October, 2025, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. My co-host in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
And we're joined today by Mark Anderson, as usual, on Friday. Now, later in the programme, we're going to be looking at the latest censorship news. We're going to be looking at Trump in Asia and his threats of nuclear proliferation and the latest on Russian oil sanctions. But we have to really begin today with the former Grand Old Duke of York, who, as we know, a couple of weeks ago was stripped of that title and has now been stripped of the princely title that he has. So if we put him on screen here, there is somehow from the grave somebody whispering in his ear there. I'm not sure what's going on. But anyway, the royal family claims to have announced that Prince Andrew is no longer Prince Andrew. He's been stripped of his princely title and is now going to be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. So let's see what the statement said. It said that His Majesty has today initiated a formal process to remove the style titles and honours of Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew will now be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. His lease on Royal Lodge has to date provided him with legal protection to continue in residence. It went on to say, formal notice has now been served to surrender the lease and he will move to alternative private accommodation, I believe to be paid for by the King personally. These censures are deemed necessary, notwithstanding the fact that he continues to deny the allegations against him. Their Majesties wish to make it clear that their thoughts and utmost sympathies have been and will remain with the victims and survivors of all forms of abuse. And my question, Patrick, is really, because I believe that when there's full disclosure about the now King's previous relationship with Jimmy Savile, that last paragraph of the statement might have some, status or standing to it. But I've absolutely questioned whether their first thoughts are with victims of abuse at all.
That's Sir Jimmy Savile, OBE.
Yeah, absolutely.
Order of the British Empire. Was he not the same Jimmy Savile that was Prince Charles's social secretary, kept the diary for the prince at the time? Is that the same Savile?
As that headline in LBC that we just showed a second ago, we could put that back on screen, says Prince Charles begged Jimmy Savile for help with royal public relations. Secret letters reveal. So
they seem to be very close.
They were clearly very close, and many questions about that relationship, which is they've never been answered.
Charles is lucky he didn't have to give up his title and style back then.
Back then, indeed. But look, it's the question is, well, first of all, before we get to the question, let's just point this out, because strangely, there's no announcement on the royal family website of this situation. No announcement there. No announcement on the X profile that this has happened. So this statement has been issued, I guess, via the BBC primarily here. So nothing there at all. But lots of people in social media are calling this a scam because they're pointing out that there's been no act of Parliament or letter patent issued. But if we paid attention to what the statement said, it said that a formal process has been initiated. So we really have to wait and see what the mechanism for this is going to be at the end of the day. But my question, Patrick, is, I think this is what we need to discuss now, is why now? Why at this particular moment? Now, a couple of possibilities here. One is that this is an effort to draw a line under royal family connections to Epstein, or Epstein, however you pronounce his name. I see some people are starting to pronounce it the other way now. But anyway, there's another possibility, and that is that they're prepared to sacrifice the past in Andrew in order to keep pressure on the present. And by that, I mean Donald Trump, because at least one commentator I heard talking about this morning claimed to be proud to be British today because the royal family is cleaning house while the United States is in complete denial. So the question is this about Trump? If we just put that back on screen, in the United States, the pressure on Trump is starting to build just at the right moment, apparently, because this is a headline here, cracks emerging in Republican loyalty to Trump as Epstein bomb is about to drop. And we've got more here. The Epstein curse continues to loom large from Spiegel International. They're reflecting the fact that this is starting to build in the United States. This is MSNBC. Their commentator, Lawrence, Trump is using the government shutdown to shut down the Epstein files. And so the question, Patrick, is this about Trump actually and is it a coincidence that this pressure is building up even higher than it has been in recent months over there, just at the time that this event happens over here?
Well, I think it really was even higher than it is now, arguably in June and July, and that's when the White House issued this, and Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, issued this formal denial that this was even a scandal and there's no black book, and that's when Charlie Kirk came under significant pressure, and other MAGA organizations came under pressure because there was a split. Because Trump campaigned on the Epstein files, made it a big centerpiece. That, we're going to release the files. My presidency is going to be transparent. And all of a sudden you have a cover up, basically, and then denials. And that caused a split. And these MAGA organizations were hemorrhaging support and membership because of that. And that's one of the things that I think also forced Charlie Kirk into that sort of position where he was questioning this undying loyalty to Israel and not being able to question Israel because of Epstein's connection with Israel. So, I mean, so this has been building up for a while. It's been building up all summer, in fact. And now you have an opportunity where you have some contrast now between the British and the American side on this.
Okay, but since you bring the Israeli connections in here, I'm not ruling out the possibility that it could also be about former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. So if we just put this on screen, Virginia Giuffre accused him of raping her and choking her on multiple occasions in court documents. Now, Barak, of course, denies these allegations, but obviously there's an Israeli connection here as well. And in fact, that there is a connection to just about the entire globalist billionaire class, as far as I can see, and really. So the question underlying all this, is this an attempt by the royal family to draw a line under it, or is it an attempt to divert from other things, or is it an attempt to put pressure on Trump? It may be all of those.
It could be all of those. I mean, this isn't just any Israeli. That's Ehud Barak, former Israeli prime minister, former head of Israeli intelligence, pretty central figure there, and best friends with Jeff Epstein, photographed coming out of his New York Manhattan mansion and so forth. So I mean, this is not just anybody. So that's why I think they're potentially explosive there on that side at the time when support for Israel is hemorrhaging in America. I think among Democrats, support for Israel's polling in single digits. When has that ever happened in the United States?
Good question. Yeah. Okay. Well, look, let's welcome Mark to the program. And Mark, let's come back onto the issue of Venezuela.
Good day, gentlemen and viewers. Yeah, of course, the mainstream press organs have been ablaze with headlines about a major troop buildup in the lower Caribbean area. And that would involve, of course, turning up the heat against Venezuela, against that regime, as Trump calls them. And I was looking through various sources trying to find something pretty objective and not go to the New York Times and not go to the Pentagon or whatever. And this slide shows the University of Southern California Dornsife, one of their more active branches in the USC system, the College of Arts and Letters. And Jeffrey Fields, October 29, published this article entitled "Trump's Anti-Venezuela Actions Lack Strategy, Lack Justifiable Targets, and lack legal authorization. President Trump okayed a naval buildup in the Caribbean, strikes on boats in international waters, and covert ops in Venezuela," says Jeffrey, "without a discernible strategy or objective." Of course, the president and the military is not going to always announce its objectives and strategies, or they're going to give you wag the dog type scenarios. But nevertheless, some pretty strong points being made by that source, and that source added the following, stressing that there's no evidence. The Trump administration claimed without evidence that the boats were carrying illegal drugs. 14 boats that the administration alleged were being operated by drug traffickers have been struck, reportedly killing 43 people. On 24 October, the Trump administration began a substantial military buildup in that region. The Pentagon moved the aircraft carrier Gerald Ford there and some of its strike group, along with several other naval ships, to that area, and moved F-35 fighter jets to Puerto Rico. And this is being called, get this, the largest U.S. naval deployment in that area since the Cuban Missile Crisis. So very significant events going on there with lots of potential ramifications. But that's a pretty good account overall that is not partisan to outline what's going on there.
Thanks, Mark. As we were talking about on Wednesday's program, Patrick, of course, the question of drugs is never too far away from this region, and the question of what this is really about. Is it about the oil in Venezuela or the rare earths in Venezuela, or is it about the fact that Chavez and Maduro have been pushing back against the drug trade, which, of course, the United States deep state has been deeply involved in for decades?
Well, let's just go by what the president himself, what the administration is hanging this on, and they're hanging the whole thing on allegations that Venezuela is a narco state. So, I mean, the more you dig into this, it's very, very much becoming like a WMDs in Iraq type rabbit hole where there's no actual evidence of the accusations being made. But let's look at the big picture. We'll bring this up on screen here. This is from the Washington Post. Trump merges the war on drugs with the war on terror in the Venezuela showdown. Now, if you survey the U.S. media, especially on the right-wing side, there's all sorts of conspiracy theories. These are nothing new in the Newsmax and One America News and Fox world, that somehow Hezbollah is working with the cartels. This is from like Marco Rubio himself, working with the cartels to do what? I don't know, ship drugs and ruin the lives of American teenagers. Who knows? And Hamas has got sleeper cells in Mexico, and Al-Qaeda and ISIS have got sleeper cells in Mexico. They found a Quran somewhere in the desert by the Arizona border. This is normal sort of fodder, but Trump is basically formalizing this here. And they have a number of hack journalists that are pushing this stuff out on social media and so forth. All these sleepers, Laura Loomer is one of them, who's kind of an Israeli influencer, Israeli American or whatever. I'm not sure where she's from or what her loyalty is, but nonetheless. So this is the narrative that they're bringing in here. So these are the two worst things of the Clinton administration and the Bush neocons: the war on terror and the war on drugs. Trump has managed to put them together. Fantastic. So and behind him is Marco Rubio, who seems to have his own personal vendetta against all Latin American governments that don't lean far right. And he's made it his career as a senator to sort of take the lead on that. Somehow he thinks that somehow he knows more than anybody about where Latin America is, what it should be, and how to bring down these governments. And then behind him is a Fox News weekend host named Pete Hegseth, who's somehow gifted the head of the Defense Department. But that's the disturbing trend there. So let's go to this video here. Now, on the issue of the drug accusation, Mike, is there any legs to that? Is there any legs to that? Let's listen to Trump, and then let's listen to a 60 Minutes report from 1993. Roll this.
Why did you authorize the CIA to go into Venezuela?
We have a lot of drugs coming in from Venezuela.
A ton of cocaine, pure cocaine worth hundreds of millions, is smuggled into the United States. Sound familiar? Not the way this ton of cocaine got here. According to what the former head of the Drug Enforcement Administration told Mike Wallace, this drug shipment got here courtesy of what he calls drug trafficking by the CIA in partnership with the Venezuelan National Guard.
Let me understand what you're saying. A ton of cocaine was smuggled into the United States of America by the Venezuelan National Guard?
Well,
in cooperation with the CIA?
That's exactly what appears to have happened.
Until last month, Judge Robert Bonner was the head of the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA. And Judge Bonner explained to us that only the head of the DEA is authorized to approve the transportation of any illegal narcotics like cocaine into this country, even if the CIA is bringing it in.
Let me put it this way, Mike. If this has not been approved by DEA or an appropriate law enforcement authority in the United States, then it's illegal. It's called drug trafficking. It's called drug smuggling.
So what you're saying, in effect, is the CIA broke the law. Simple as that.
I don't think there's any other way you can rationalize around it.
Back in the 1980s, the CIA was mandated.
So, Mike, they're taking Colombian cocaine and trafficking it through Venezuela. and then the CIA and the DEA would then bring it into the United States, and it would end up on the streets of America. That was in the early 90s. Now, something happened in Venezuela. Hugo Chavez became president, and that was the end of that. No more drug trafficking, using the National Guard as mules for the Central Intelligence Agency and the DEA.
Right.
So the biggest drug traffickers in the Western Hemisphere are the CIA and the DEA, working in collaboration with the cartels. So where's Trump coming up with this? And we only have to look at the work of the Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Gary Webb, the late Gary Webb, the great Gary Webb. His Dark Alliance series is historic. And this basically documents how the CIA brought crack cocaine onto the streets of Los Angeles and major U.S. cities, and then to blame and demonize the African American community, and also just to sort of destroy it ultimately. And so that was fleshed out in the 1990s. So, I mean, it's interesting. There's a few other elements to this, I think, but that's what happened. And Nicolas Maduro carries on that same legacy of Chavez. And if anything, Venezuela is an anti-narco state. So how on earth can any of these accusations stick without any evidence? That's the big question here.
Just before you move on from Gary Webb, we should just remind everybody, of course, he committed suicide in inverted commas by shooting himself twice in the head, which is
from behind with a shotgun, something like that.
It was a handgun, but it was a practical impossibility, if not a total impossibility. And I'm just going to say that in the months leading up to his death, I was on a mailing list that he was part of, and obviously I never met him, I never spoke to him in person, but he did not seem to be at the point of suicide in any of the communications that I saw with that group.
No, and the late Robert Perry also worked with him on these same stories.
Yes.
And Robert, in effect, was a supporter and a bit of a mentor for him. Robert had told me that as well in an interview, which we published before he passed away a few years ago.
Right.
The great Robert Perry, investigative journalist, founder of Consortium News.
Yes.
But let's look at this, because here's where it gets interesting. So then, it's not enough to demonize Venezuela. Trump is now imposing sanctions on Colombia's president, Gustavo Petro. Now, Colombia was the #1 U.S. ally, okay? Third or fourth largest recipient of U.S. military aid. But they had a right-wing government in, so obviously very friendly with Washington and very supportive. And there's another connection here, not just the United States. Why all of a sudden are they demonizing Colombia? It's strange, but maybe not. Listen to this video very closely. This is President Petro at the UN General Assembly just last month. And this is what he said about a very close friend and ally of the United States. Go ahead and roll this.
First and foremost, we need to stop the genocide in Gaza. Humanity cannot allow a single day more of this genocide. Or for the genocidal Netanyahu and his allies in Europe and the United States to continue. The United Nations must uphold the decisions of the International Court of Justice. International law is the basis of civilization, and united for peace for Palestine. We should establish a peacekeeping force to protect, where it's not blue helmets. No, what we need is a powerful army of countries that do not accept genocide. That is why I invite nations of the world and their peoples, most importantly, as a integral part of humanity, to bring together weapons and armies and to defend Palestine.
So he's calling for more than peacekeepers there. He said, no blue helmets. We need to bring armed forces in from other countries to defend Palestine. That's a bridge too far for Israel. So they've clearly putting pressure on Washington to basically move on Colombia. I think this is a major issue. And I wonder why. What else about Colombia and Israel? There's some history there. Look at this. Okay, there's a very good, very well-researched article here, by the way, Security in Context. Colombia shifting military ties, moving away from decades of Israeli-sponsored violence. In Colombia, what's this all about? What's Israel's business in Colombia for the last 25 years? Kind of interesting, isn't it? What were they doing there? It turns out Israel was selling loads of billions, in fact, of weapons to Colombia. Okay. And the other thing they were doing, they were training the radical far right paramilitary forces that were fighting the FARC in Colombia. Okay. Trained by the Israelis. And these were known as death squads. Okay. Didn't get a lot of bad press in America because they're allied with America at the time.
Right.
So isn't that interesting? And there's other things. There's allegations potentially of Israeli military involved in, who knows, maybe some of the drug trade. Maybe some import-export activity into the Middle East and Europe. Who knows? There's a lot of accusations flying around on this. But Israel's deeply involved in Colombia, but not under Gustavo Petro, you see. So we see this split in policy, and all of a sudden they're demonized. I find it to be more than a coincidence. And here is Venezuela, just to remind people on the Venezuelan side. Venezuelan president says Palestine is the most just cause for humanity on the day of solidarity with the Palestinian people. He's wearing the scarf there. That's Maduro. How many world leaders will wear a Palestinian scarf at a major state rally? In Venezuela, this is normal. So this is another reason. So, by the way, 2009, the first country to recognize a Palestinian state in the Western Hemisphere was Venezuela. So this is nothing new. It's been a tradition from Chavez all the way through to Maduro. So it's just funny that they're being singled out with all sorts of fake allegations, unsubstantiated allegations of Venezuela being a narco state. When in fact, as we said, Mike, the biggest drug traffickers in the hemisphere are the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency of the United States, and the CIA. Traditionally, that's documented fact, as we showed.
Okay, well, let's move on then to Donald Trump in Korea with President Xi Jinping. They've met in South Korea. Well, the question is, what happened? Did Trump cave again in terms of trade? Because the tariffs on China are now around 20%, which is lower than some of what the US calls their allies. In exchange for China buying soybeans, Trump got rid of the fentanyl tariff. He suspended the targeted sanctions on Chinese shipping. He suspended the BIS 50% rule targeting China's semiconductor companies. And this is a rule which says that if a US subsidiary company is owned 50% or more by entities on the BIS entity list or military end user list, so in other words, Chinese companies, if they own 50% or more of the US subsidiary, then those subsidiaries would be subjected to the same trade restrictions as the parent companies. In exchange for all this, then China will roll back rare earth export control imposed after the 6th of October. But any export control before October is still in place, so still no rare earths for the United States. But so I'm going to say thank you very much to Carl Za for that breakdown of what happened there. But anyway, the Dutch government is now going to feel very silly for this situation, this story. This is Nexperia, which is a semiconductor company. And this was done on behalf of Trump. So basically, the Dutch government took control of Nexperia from its Chinese owner, Wingtech Technology, on the 30th of September, after the Dutch arm claimed that the Chinese unit had supplied they were not supposed to be supplying local customers in China with semiconductors, but they were doing that. And more to the point, the Dutch company was stipulating that distributors would need to settle these deals in dollars rather than yuan, and they were being settled in yuan. So anyway, this caused the Dutch government to step in and take over the thing. Well, the question is China going to make an example out of the Dutch government or the Dutch for this?
So what the Dutch are nationalizing that arm?
They effectively took control of it, yes.
That's exactly what the Germans are planning to do with Rosneft affiliates in Germany, nationalizing. So it's taking the state assets of Russia and the private assets of Rosneft and nationalizing under the German aegis.
So not only did they take control of the company, they then tried to send diktats to the Chinese arm, and of course that just didn't fly. So and then finally on this, of course, the question is that all the companies that changed supply chains and pulled out of China because of the previous or the trade regime up until just now, they're going to be losing money as a result.
So when Trump had his quote Liberation Day,
right,
a lot of people were like getting ahead of the game and thinking, well, we need to basically cut supply chains with these sort of so hostile nations like China,
right,
and to great expense,
yes.
Right, and all of a sudden.
It seems to be back on again.
So it's back on again. So they lost a lot of money.
Yeah. So I mean, who knows how this is going to turn out? The problem is that no sooner had that meeting, you could look at the meeting in and of itself in a positive light, but no sooner had that meeting happened, then the next thing was Trump is saying, oh well, China's rebuilding its building a nuclear arsenal here. We've got to start testing nuclear weapons again. And Mark, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but Trump's. The Independent was saying that Trump's comments on nuclear testing upend decades of U.S. policy. What are your thoughts?
Well, my initial thoughts, and we can show that Independent headline as I'm talking, my initial thoughts are, of course, Trump's comments in and of themselves are not going to upend anything. Actually changing U.S. policy and at least planning or carrying out renewed nuclear testing, that would definitely upend decades of U.S. policy. This subhead in that story says Trump has suggested the U.S. will restart nuclear weapons testing, a move, again, saying that it upends decades of American policy. It reminds me of Ronald Reagan, who also was a peace through strength guy. And there was a lot of saber rattling during his presidency, but that's typically all it amounts to is saber rattling. At any rate, the atomicarchive.com turned out to be a pretty objective source on this. And I have a chart here that I found that puts things in pretty good perspective. There's been a total of 2,056 nuclear tests since 1945, and the U.S. has been responsible for about half of those, or 1,030, 715 from Russia, the United Kingdom a mere 45, France 210, China also 45, India 3, and Pakistan 2, and North Korea 6. And right around the early 90s, testing began to fall off a lot. And by the time you got to the early 2000s, there's no record of any known nuclear tests. But atomicarchive.com also had this to say, just for clarification, since the first nuclear test explosion on 16 July 1945, of course, that was the Trinity test by Oppenheimer, at least 8 nations have detonated 2,056 nuclear test explosions at dozens of test sites, including Lop Nor in China, the atolls of the Pacific, lots of exposure to radiation, of course, in the Bikini Atoll, Nevada, Algeria, where France conducted its first nuclear device, Western Australia, where the UK exploded nuclear weapons, and the Southern Atlantic across Russia and elsewhere. And I remember during my nuke activist days, in my early journalist days, I was sort of a nuke activist. And there was a book that came out then when the U.S. was doing open air testing, and the book was called The Day We Bombed Utah. And it spoke of nuclear fallout coming down on cities and towns in Utah and spikes in cases of cancer. And so the open air testing that the U.S. did in the 50s was especially dangerous, and that's why they moved it underground. I think if memory serves, we have one more slide on this at any rate. And maybe we're done. At any rate, I think that's sufficient. That's kind of a picture of who's been doing the testing and how many. And so it would be a very, dramatic and sharp move to go back to that after all that's been done and after the relative lack now of testing ever since the early 2000s. So back to you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the other thing to talk about here, Mark, is Patrick, I'll bring you in at this point. The removal of the withdrawal of various countries from non-proliferation treaties. I mean, 2002, the United States left the ABM, the
Anti-ballistic
ballistic missile treaty, and that was sort of seen as a trigger that started 20 years of erosion of nuclear arms control. 2018, of course, Trump pulled out of the JCPOA. And although that didn't directly cause Russia to suspend New START or CTBT, it certainly contributed to that.
But it also opened up the door with aggression against Iran, which ended up with a war this past summer.
Absolutely. And then, of course, the 2019 Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty that the US withdrew from. 2023, as Russia removed themselves from the New START and from the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And so, this is a trend which has been developing for quite some time, but we're now starting to see us getting pretty close to pretty dangerous territory if we're starting to test again.
Yeah, and by the way, Russia removing itself from those agreements were basically mirroring the United States, basically not fulfilling their obligations, and Russia suspended its obligations.
Right.
But it's obviously being spun in the media a certain way. But yeah, and the other thing is, by the way, we were talking about testing. So this is how Israel got around the issue of how does Israel, with a secret nuclear arsenal, test its weapons? Well, the French did it for them in Bikini Atoll in the South Pacific and in the Saharan Desert in Algeria.
That explains why the French number that Mark just showed was quite as high as it was.
Yeah, and we showed the data for that. Freddie Ponton, a journalist from France, did a great job breaking a lot of that down on reports that we did on 21st Century Wire. But isn't that amazing how Israel managed to sidestep that huge problem? Is how do you test a secret nuclear arsenal?
Well, let's just look at this then, because the Telegraph a couple of days ago was reporting that Britain must look at sharing nuclear weapons with Germany to counter the critical threat posed by Russia, of course. And this is according to British defence chiefs. Now, they're saying that this includes, by the way, George Robertson, the former head of NATO, who was the man who's just written the Defence Review on behalf of the Starmer regime. So they're basically saying that the UK needs to open talks with Berlin over what they're describing as a fresh defence pact. Germany, they say, is already in, quote, strategic discussions with Paris over how the French could provide potential protection in the form of its own nuclear deterrent. But Merz apparently is very keen to speak to Starmer about Britain getting involved in this as well. Now, this is really important because, of course, we've been talking about the development of the European defence capability for a long time now, but the core of this has been the Franco-British axis until more recently when Germany started joining that. So, from a defence, pushing a defence narrative, Britain and France have been pushing that. The political union narrative, of course, in the EU has mainly been France and Germany. So it makes sense to get everybody together
in an axis.
In an axis, an axis of evil, I would even go as far as to say. But this France, Britain, Germany axis also expresses itself in the form of the E3, which is this grouping that's now sort of driving defence and foreign policy within the EU. So, but Britain, of course, left the EU. So,
it's extraordinary. Well, not quite,
not
but,
quite, exactly.
But what's extraordinary about this is Friedrich Merz, not very popular in Germany, not very popular. It's debatable whether he will survive the next round of elections for his party. The coalition. Macron, to say he's unpopular is a massive understatement.
Right.
And then there's Keir Starmer. So you have three unpopular, hugely unpopular leaders that are ruling or governing by threads, and they're doing this major paradigm shift in the European security architecture that is basically nuclear proliferation.
Yeah, but we've always got to remember that this is not their policy. They're merely enacting it. This is a deep state policy that's been in operation this is just the culmination of something that's been running for a long time.
Sure, it is. But still, they're the ones who are going to basically put it in motion or sign for it on behalf of the electorate.
Yeah.
But we don't have any say in any of that. And for the U.S., this is not good news. You don't want another nuclear variable in Europe. It's enough. Between in the Cold War, Mike, there was a balance in the bipolar distribution. There was a balance between the United States and the Soviet Union. They sort of canceled each other out in the old doctrine. But you add a third actor. Do you trust some of these European actors that they'll be rational?
I don't trust some of the British actors that they'll be rational. I mean, they're insane.
I don't necessarily trust the U.S. Under the current administration, but I do trust the U.S. a lot more because they have a long pedigree, as do the Russians, in having this kind of long-standing, canceling each other out, bipolar arrangement. But Europe has a great tradition in starting massive wars and basically trying to wipe each other out. This has happened a number of times in the last 150 years. So, I mean, I'm just saying, I'm a little skeptical.
Absolutely. Now, sticking with defense, just briefly, what's going on with the media and the Department of War in the United States?
This is from last week, okay? And this should really shock people. Journalists turn in their access badges after a row with the Pentagon over new reporting rules. Basically, Pete Hegseth, again, a Fox News weekend host that Trump gave, or Israel told Trump to hire him as defense secretary. He's basically saying that all the media outlets have to run their reporting through his office for approval. So any reporting on the DOD, which is now called the Department of War, okay, has to run through the Pentagon's special media office.
I'm sorry to say this again, but this is real Nazi Germany stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if China does this, they'll say, oh, there's no transparency, it's not democratic. If Russia does it, they'd say the same thing. But in America, I mean, seriously, this is like going against the First Amendment. So again, this is a pattern of the Trump administration undermining the U.S. Constitution, freedom of the press. And so let's take a closer look at that. Let's bring this up. So this is the response. So the War departments have replaced AP, and obviously this is going into the courts, by the way. So this could change. But as of last week, the new media outlets for the Department of War were Lindell TV. That's Mike Lindell. He sells pillows and slippers on cable. The Gateway Pundit, not really the best website in terms of hard news and defense and geopolitics. The Post Millennial, they specialize in anti-woke articles and going after trans and LGBT in Portland. That's their mainstay. What do they know about geopolitics and defense policy? Not much. Human Events, that's Jack Posobiec. That's MAGA. It's basically a MAGA website. And then the National Pulse, that's Rahmeh Kassim, I think. And again, very MAGA. Okay. So, I mean, are they going to be critical with anything the U.S. is doing in starting wars around the world? Any of these MAGA outlets, websites, basically? These are websites. So listen, the mainstream media, for all its faults, they do have people on staff who do this for a living, their whole career. And if they are going to call out the U.S. government or the president or something like that, or at least get accountability, there's a higher chance they'll be able to do it than the Gateway Pundit. So I'm just saying this is a really shocking development, and I think people should.
But there was more?
Oh, there's more. Sorry. There's one more. Let me see. There's another. Yeah, the list also includes Turning Point USA's media brand Frontlines. I never heard of that. Don't know what it is. Influencer Tim Pool's Timcast. That's a YouTube channel. And the Substack-based newsletter called The Washington Reporter. These are, I guess, are paragons of journalism. What can we say? Maybe we should apply for a pass. I'm probably not going to get it. They don't like anybody who's critical of Trump. Doesn't like any media outlets critical of him, and will deny them access. So this is like what's going on. So pretty incredible.
Okay, then let's keep an eye on that. Okay, if you like what the UK column does, you'd like to support us, please have a look at the website. There are options to help us out. If you have a look at that section on screen at the moment. If you can't support us financially, then please do share material that you see on the website and help us beat the censorship regime in the UK and elsewhere. Now, tonight at 7 p.m, Charles and I, as usual, are speaking to Jerm for the weekly banter. Join us for that. And then at 9, Carl Zah is speaking to Dr. Warwick Powell on the unraveling of Trump's trade war. And this is focusing on the Trump-Xi visit. So have a look at that at 9 p.m. tonight. A reminder of the interview between me and Jose Biamorgi, the Venezuelan ambassador to Lebanon and Syria. Yesterday, that went out yesterday. It's now on the website on demand if you want to have a look at that. It covers a lot of some of the topics that we spoke about in the Venezuelan segment today, but we're hearing it from the horse's mouth, as it were, and certainly he absolutely is putting quite a lot of the responsibility for what's going on at Marco Rubio's door. Well, we can talk about that a bit more in extra. Now, I want to highlight an article which is going to cause some people some difficulty, but I'm just going to say it's worth reading. It is fantastic. Islam is not the enemy of Christianity. This is an Arab Christian perspective. This is from someone in the Middle East who is an Arab Christian, and just wanted to put her perspective on the relationship between Islam and Christianity, or at least how it should be. But as I say, it might cause some cognitive dissonance in some people, and if it does, well, I would just urge you to consider what's being said. Just take a step back and consider it, because it's worth consideration.
Yeah, sometimes a shock to some people in the West to know that there are actual Christians living in Palestine peacefully with Muslims, and in Lebanon and Syria as well. Maybe not with the current Syrian regime, which is a U.S.-backed terrorist leader, but before that, under the Assad government, all denominations living in harmony with each other, mostly anyway, in Iraq as well.
Yes.
The same in Iraq. So I know that comes as a shock. Yes, Christians in the Holy Land, Arab Christians, but it's true. We testify. This is a fact. They've been there for thousands of years. Or no, not Christians. Well, 2,000.
Yes.
So.
But anyway, now the 1,000 Words podcast that went out last week, the second part of that is going out on Sunday at 7 p.m. As James Dellingpole is being painted by Jake Fern. And of course, they're having discussions on I think this week they are focusing on the things that brought James Dellingpole from where he was to where he is today.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a bit more about his how he has his opinions have evolved since he was
his Damascene conversion.
Yes.
from the Telegraph to where he is now. It's probably fascinating.
Absolutely. Now that's for members only. So, but do join us for that 7 p.m. On Sunday. And finally, a reminder of tomorrow, the digital ID protest in Edinburgh. 1 p.m. The Mound, Princess Street in Edinburgh. If you can possibly get along for that, please do go and support those guys, because this is a topic which, of course, is very close to many, many people's hearts. So as much support as possible would be fantastic. Now, Patrick, let's move on then to the issue of Russian oil exports and sanctions and so on.
Well, this is an interesting topic. We were going to have a guest, international lawyer Arnaud Develeux, join us. There were connection issues, big tech issues between the East and the West right now because of sanctions. So
we'll find a workaround for that, and we'll speak to him again.
We'll bring him on in future.
Yes.
But nonetheless, let's bring this up. So this is the big question. Will Trump's sanctions against Russia make a dent in their oil exports? You know, basically, how serious is this? And just to there they are now. I guess all the goodwill from Anchorage is expended, and now we're at with new levels of economic war. So what Trump's trying to do here, Mike, is extract some kind of concessions from Russia in terms of getting them to agree to freeze the conflict in Ukraine, as an example. So this does have a lot to do with what's happening on the battlefield in Ukraine right now. The question is how serious it is. They've sanctioned Russia to high heaven since 2014, in fact, after after Crimea reunited with the Russian Federation, or Russia annexed it, depending on which perspective you take. And then after the Ukraine conflict kicked off in February 2022, another level of sanctioning. So what could the West possibly do to Russia that would really hurt it if Russia has weathered the storm and is out competing Europe in terms of GDP growth and economic performance? Well, is this really a checkmate? Well, let's take a look. And just to review, this is something we mentioned earlier here. We're talking about these two major producers, Rosneft and Lukoil, which comprise of 5% of the global oil trade, which is significant. This might not sound like a lot, 5%, but it is a 20th of the global oil trade. So it is a lot. But China is halting oil purchases from these companies. That's massive. Before, China was basically still trading and basically sidestepped any threats. And India, same. These are three main founding BRICS countries: Russia, China, and India. So has Trump done a major move here, a checkmate, if you will, against BRICS and against Russia? Well, the consensus is this is going to hurt Russia in the short term, for sure. And what's interesting is in November, I think the end of November is the deadline where Lukoil, which has facilities all over the world, and these can be now seized under kind of, eminent domain under these sanctions. So they're now trying to sell all of their facilities and properties in the next 3 weeks, and they're going for nothing, basically. So those are the reports that we've got out of Russia. So they're basically, if whatever is not basically liquidated by I think November 17th, right around there, then it's basically they can lose them.
What does international law say about this? Is this legitimate? What the United States is doing?
Absolutely, it's not. This should go into some kind of a forum, like the UN General Assembly or the Security Council, or some kind of arbitration. So it's completely against international law, and especially at a time when the U.S. doesn't want to come to any political settlement over Ukraine. They want to settle it on the battlefield. The Europeans want to settle on the battlefield, and then they're waging economic warfare against Russia, and then sanctioning anyone who's buying Russian oil. So that's also secondary sanctions are absolutely in violation of international law. So Hungary wants a waiver. They will probably get a waiver. Same with Slovakia and a number of other countries. Germany's got a waiver for Rosneft. In Germany, they still rely on Russia. And Germany's, as we said, they're going to possibly seize and nationalize those the Russian Rosneft refineries and so forth in Germany, because that's the only way around it, is to steal it and nationalize it. So this is kind of crazy what's going on here.
Should Russia not view that as an act of war?
It is. Wars have been started over this in the past. In fact, this is arguably one of the reasons why Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941, was they were being strangled and shut off from the global markets by the Americans and the British. So it was really kind of a preemptive move to hit the U.S. Bases in Hawaii and Pearl Harbor. There's more to it than that, but so the questions that this raises, Mike, is OPEC. How's OPEC going to respond? Is OPEC going to increase production to keep the price of oil down? Because what the U.S. don't want is a spike in oil prices, because that's going to create problems economically for Trump and for the West, but also it's going to benefit Russia, because according to Russian experts, just a slight increase in price will make up for the lost trade, you see. So, I mean, those are the sort of variables that we're dealing with here. And so it is interesting. And you know what else is interesting is the Rosatom is the nuclear provider for Russia. They're exempt from all sanctions globally. They've got a white waiver for everyone relies on them around the world. They do a full end-to-end solution, from uranium to cleanup to facilities, to build the facilities, maintain the facilities. It's a fantastic company, which is mostly, I believe, state-owned. They have a complete waiver. And Japan is basically ignoring any threats of sanctions. They buy a lot of LNG from Russia. The Sakhalin site is a joint venture between the Japanese and the Russian government. And Japan's saying, no, we're keeping our relationship with Russia. They don't buy a lot of oil from Russia, Japan. They get it from other places. They only get a small percentage from Russia. So Japan is basically not affected by this at all, and is pushing back against any pressure not to buy Russian liquefied natural gas. So that's interesting. So Asia, it'll be interesting to see what direction this goes, how China and Russia will adapt on this. And we might see some changes in the structure of the Russian, these companies could become nationalized in Russia itself, and it becomes much more difficult to sanction if these are state-owned companies.
So last question, Patrick, because on this, bearing in mind that the so-called global South is the global majority, why isn't there much more of a sort of an international outcry about this?
I don't know per se now. I think there's just so many there's tariff wars and sanctions. The U.S. is basically using tariffs as sanctions to punish people for not behaving the way they want or not submitting to whatever the weekly diktats are, which are constantly changing from the Trump administration. So there's a lot of chaos, I think, and there's a lot of noise and hysteria going on right now. So trying to get a consolidated response to what the U.S. is doing here is going to be difficult. Okay, everyone's just trying to survive in this economy. So, I mean, there's a lot of problems with that. So, I think personally, in the long term, I think in the short term, the sanctions against Russia, these particular ones, are going to hurt Russia in the short term, and you're going to see probably Q4 2026. That's when you'll start to see on the balance sheet what sort of effect this has. But I've been speaking to experts in Russia, Mike, on this, and they said that this Ukraine war is going to be done by Q4 of 2026. When I say done, we're talking about Odessa, Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, and these sort of key regions that they're fighting over right now, which geopolitically change the whole viewpoint of this conflict. For NATO, that means basically they're done. NATO's southern flank is finished, if that's the case. They're really pushing Russia's hand because if this is going to create pain in Russia, Mike, and that's going to create political pressure for Putin and this government, then they're incentivizing Russia to move quicker and harder in Ukraine. And so what's that? Is that going to elicit an aggressive response from Europe? Is this how we're going to get war?
Yeah.
That's a legitimate question as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's come back to the UK then and online safety, because Sunday was the Online Safety Act's second birthday. We should all have been celebrating. I hope everyone was celebrating. Hope you appreciate my sarcasm there. But anyway, Ofcom's Group Director for Online Safety, Oliver Griffiths, said that real change is happening. We've laid the foundations for a safer life online. Do you feel safer online, Patrick? Yeah, okay. He said tech platforms now have clear legal duties to protect people, especially children, from illegal and harmful content. Now, this is important because the concept of legal but harmful content never really went away. So we have to look a bit behind what he was saying there. Anyway, Ofcom announced that they're going to publish a report detailing their progress to creating a censorship industrial sorry, I've completely forgotten the word. That's going to be published in December anyway. Now, here's Ofcom's head, Dame Melanie Dawes, because she's written to the chairs of the Communications and Digital Select Committee and also the Science, Innovation and Technology Committee to claim all kinds of success so far. She said the most visible and significant change so far has been the introduction of age checks across online pornography sites and other sites hosting priority content as defined in the Act to prevent under 18s from being able to access this content. I mean, this is absolutely her position. But of course, this business of under 18s being able to access content, well, that might be the case, but it does nothing to prevent those over 18 from posing as under 18s on sites that target children. So it should come as no surprise then that the first imprisonment under the Online Safety Act is of an adult who abused a 17-year-old and caused her to self-harm. This is presented as a huge success for the Online Safety Act, but in fact, it's an utter failure. The Act did and does nothing to prevent this type of abuse, and the crimes committed by this person were already illegal. So this prosecution could have been on the basis of already existing legislation. Child abuse and causing self-harm were not legal before the Online Safety Act, so to claim that this is some kind of success is complete and utter nonsense. But anyway, in the meantime, the war of words between Wikipedia and the UK regime continues because Wikipedia is also subject to the age verification requirements that the pornography sites are. And this is upsetting Jimmy Wales because the best deep state editors of the planet's greatest propaganda machine wish to remain anonymous. And Jimmy wants them to remain anonymous. He wants them to be able to remain anonymous, but Starmer's saying no to that. And so that fight is continuing.
Wow. So intelligence agencies are battling the government
absolutely
on this.
Yes.
The professional trolls.
In the EU, then, LinkedIn has been ramping up its censorship regime, and the European Commission has been forced to deny that it's had anything to do with, so that the censorship had anything to do with the Digital Services Act, which is the EU's equivalent to the Online Safety Act. That's a pretty lame excuse because, of course, LinkedIn and all the platforms are responding to the legislative framework they find themselves in primarily. Because LinkedIn doesn't really have any skin in the game as far as advertising is concerned, so they're not worried about content that may put advertisers off as such. So this is mainly about the Digital Services Act and the Online Safety Act. But I just wanted to end this topic with this article. This was originally published a couple of months ago on the Conversation website, but the Cobb Courier here, the Cobb Courier is a local website in the United States, has just republished this, and the headline is "Self-Censorship and the Spiral of Silence: Why Americans Are Less Likely to Publicly Voice Their Opinions on Political Issues." And it talks about people self-censoring because people are being driven to extreme positions as a result of current events, and people are therefore afraid to speak out because of the abuse they receive from people on the other end of the political spectrum. And so what's being described here is that the polarization of opinion is in and of itself a mechanism of censorship, because the divide and conquer policy, in other words, is a gift that keeps on giving. If people want to, I'm going to suggest here that if people want to resist policies they disagree with, maybe we should be engaging people that we people that we disagree with in a way which sort of enables conversations rather than well, what is sort of digital bloodshed as we see on X and other platforms at the moment. But I think I thought that was a pretty insightful article because there is no question that as people's opinions move to the extremes, it gets harder for them to express them without ending up in just a massive war.
Yeah, in my experience personally, engaging with other Americans on just germane political conversations is there's a huge gap between what people know or think they know and what's actually true.
Yes.
And for some people, you can't get over the conversation that they believe Michelle Obama's a man, basically, and they're just stuck on that. They believe all sorts of things, but so you can't really have an intelligent political conversation. That's of course, that's just my opinion that Michelle Obama is a biological female, but people have been radicalized.
I couldn't possibly comment.
They've been radicalized on this stuff. So it is kind of frustrating. And because of that, it's affected both sides will not talk to each other, basically. So if you're intelligent, and you want to have an intellectual conversation somewhere in the middle, you're not welcome. You're not welcome.
That's the case.
Yeah.
And so conversations aren't happening. But in the meantime, speaking of conversations, at least an attempt to stop conversations happening. What's the latest on the doctors that are being censored?
Well, there's a UK story here, and we'll bring this image up on screen. So this is UK Israeli censorship. Let's just call it what it is. This is here Dr. Rahmeh Aladwan, and they're attempting to revoke her license to practice medicine, get her struck from the General Medical Council on this here, and the coverage on this is just unbelievable. So we go to the right. This is the Telegraph. NH doctor who celebrated Hamas October 7th attack. Notice how they put that in single quotes. Is arrested. And they put it in single quotes. So this is an accusation probably from, I don't know, an Israeli lobby or a Jewish lobby organization. They put it in single quotes. It's highly libelous and defamatory because clearly she wasn't celebrating October 7th. But the Telegraph are playing a bit cute with that one by putting it in single quotes. And then on the left, World Socialist website defending her, UK government-backed persecution of anti-genocide medic Dr. Rahmeh Aladwan continues. You see the difference between the media coverage, but the entire mainstream in Britain is railing against her. So, if you're into the underdog and you don't trust the establishment, then maybe you should consider what side you're taking on this. But here's what's happened to her since she has been released. She says, this is on her X account a few days ago, I'm effectively on a form of house arrest. My bail conditions for lawful speech, a July talk she gave, and 3 posts on X. She's banned from any public demonstration or event in London relating to Palestine or Israel. Curfewed to live and sleep at a specific address, must notify a detective if she is to leave home for more than 48 hours. Yesterday, the chair of the tribunal cut her off from reading out one sentence. The GMC had also specifically requested that I am not to speak, says Dr. Aladwan. This is what the political persecution of a doctor looks like in Britain today. Pretty amazing. House arrest for tweets. So all the people on the right that were railing in Elon Musk and JD Vance about people being, arrested or door knocked by the police for tweets, none of those people, the so-called conservatives, are coming to her rescue because they don't like the fact that she is defending Palestinians. And she herself is from the Levant, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, she's, I believe, Jordanian, of Jordanian Palestinian descent. So she's talking about her people effectively, but yet this is criminalized speech. So where are all the free speech warriors on the right? Are you going to defend her on principle or not? Because Israel's involved in the issue.
No, is apparently the case. Yeah, indeed. Mark, let's come back to you then to end and just bring us a little bit more on what the White House has been saying about Gaza.
Well, this just in, you might say, Mike, you had asked me to look this up. And everything I looked up was about a week and a half old regarding White House negotiators Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. This is from Politico, 20 October. Those two guys returned to the Middle East and met with Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel after a weekend where the ceasefire at that time looked increasingly in danger as Israel launched a wave of strikes on targets in Gaza around October 19, which Palestinian authorities said killed dozens of people, including children. After 2 Israeli troops, I would say allegedly, were killed by militants, Hamas said it was not responsible for the attack on those soldiers. So there's, of course, a lot of concern about wanting to make Gaza a real estate mecca in the wake of all this tragedy. And these negotiators are, working around a ceasefire that really never was. And it truly is a disheartening and tragic thing to see with Israel getting away with so many crimes, breaking international law. And as we mentioned earlier, escaping the overall chronicling and archiving of data on nuclear weapons tests when they have a nuclear arsenal they've had for a long time, and yet it's been kept unofficial. And that really adds insult to injury as to what Israel's been doing in Gaza. So I didn't have a lot of time to look into this in detail, but I think that puts a good ending on today's show, kind of sums things up.
Well, of course, Witkoff and so on, they were seen on camera recently causing each other, Kushner and Witkoff causing each other a little bit of embarrassment. What was going on there?
We'll go to that in a second. They had an interview with 60 Minutes and Leslie Stahl. Really embarrassing, actually. We'll show that clip in a minute. But Israel is basically pioneering a new concept here, Mike. It's a temporarily permanent ceasefire. The temporarily permanent ceasefire. And I might add, under international law, Israeli soldiers, the IDF or IOF, depending on which acronym you use, they have no rights under international law as illegal occupiers in Gaza. Just saying, the fact that their safety is somehow part of any negotiation or ceasefire agreement is patently ridiculous. But unfortunately, you're dealing with a perennial violator of multiple UN resolutions over the last 80 years. But so this is clip. Watch this clip and watch the reaction from Jared Kushner when the 60 Minutes host asks Steve Witkoff, and Steve Witkoff seems to give away the entire game on this, and just Kushner is panicking, visibly disheveled. Watch this.
Your builders You've been in real estate. Tell us more about the plan and how much it's going to cost. Where's the money going to come from? And who's going to award the contracts?
I think it's going to cost a lot of money.
What's a lot of money?
The estimates are in the $50 billion range. It might be a little bit less. It might be a little bit more. I happen to think that that's not a lot of money in that region. You have governments that are going to jump on in.
Middle East countries are going to provide the money.
You'll see European participation and so forth. The beginning of this plan is how to get it going. That's what me and Jared work on all the time. The money raising we think is the easy part, but it's the master plan, and we're working with a group of people who have been working on master plans for the last 2 years.
So there are plans already.
Yeah. We have plans already. We have a master plan already. And by the way, and Jared's been pushing this, and we're working together on it. And I think if the world saw the progress so far, they'd be pretty impressed.
Well, it's always good to end the program on a comedy moment, Patrick. But that, in a sense, it's a comedy moment because clearly Kushner was extremely embarrassed by that. But what we're actually looking at, we should always keep in mind, is thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, basically a population decimated to make room for this master plan.
Yeah, and he's been working on it Jared's been working on it for 2 years. Since October 7th. And Steve Witkoff gave it away. The Del Boy of diplomacy, Steve Witkoff, gave the game away. And that's what it's all about. Trump tweeted out this Gaza Riviera thing with this gaudy AI video back at the beginning of his term in February. And that was just kind of like a big FU, I think, to the Palestinians and to the international community on this. And there you go. These two shysters, a couple of crooks, a couple of criminals, and their boss is running a protection racket, basically, in the region, or Netanyahu is. I don't know who their boss is. Which cabinet do they work for? The Israeli cabinet or the American government's cabinet? This is an open question that we don't actually know the answer to.
The British.
At this point. Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a Union Jack inside Jared's designer suit.
We'll leave it on that thought. So look, we'll be back in a couple of minutes if you're a UK column member for some news extra. Join us for that if you can. Otherwise, don't forget Jerem at 7 and Silken Road podcast at 9. Join us at 1 p.m. on Monday as usual, and hope everyone has a great weekend in the meantime. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.